Okay, good morning everyone. We finished our other book yesterday and I'm going to start a new one today. This one will be a great one for the Easter season. This book is called They Call Him the Miracle Man by Bradley Booth. Again, it's one of our favorite authors at Piqua Seventh Adventist Christian School. But this is the story of a man who lived during Bible times. It's historical fiction, but it's based on facts, so it definitely could have happened. And he had heard about Jesus and he was searching for Jesus, and this takes place during the final week of Jesus' life. So this is the Friday before Easter, which would have been the Friday before Passover. So I'm going to read one chapter each day until a couple of days past Easter, actually, to give you a good feel of what life could have been like then. I'm going to read the back of the book and then we'll get started with the first chapter. The Quest of a Lifetime. Intriguing rumors of a revolutionary teacher, Jesus of Nazareth, had reached the ears of Malachi the merchant. A great prophet, said some. Mighty healer, others claimed. Some called him the Promised One. They told how he fed thousands with a single basket of food, even raised the dead. Legends and folk tales probably, but Malachi had to know. His policy was, show me the goods before I buy the merchandise. He had to get to the bottom of it all. Eyewitnesses, that's what he needed, so he went looking in Jerusalem and found them, men and women who had met Jesus, the rabbi, the captain of the guard, Lazarus, the tax commissioner, the tortured thief, even the risen Rahab. Their incredible reports made him all the more determined to find Jesus. Or was he already too late? Okay. With skillful dialogue and sanctified imagination based on historical research, Bradley Booth paints a fresh portrait of Jesus through the eyes of those who met him and inspires us to adore him anew. Bradley Booth has taught in the United States, West Africa, and Russia. Currently, he is an associate professor of psychology and education at Atlantic Union College, South Lancaster, Massachusetts. Okay? And I'm not sure how current that is because this book has been around a while. It was copyrighted in 2004, so he may not be doing that just now, but he's one of our favorite authors. Okay, Chapter 1, Friday. The sounds of insects and other creatures serenaded the cool night like a young mother lulling her child to sleep. It was the third hour of the evening watch. Malachi leaned over the parapet of the rooftop room he had rented for the week and gazed out across Jerusalem, bathed by the Passover moon. For centuries, the ancient city had been a center of commerce, political tension, and zealous worship of the one true God. Jerusalem was the cosmopolitan home of traveling merchants, religious sects such as the Pharisees and Sadducees, and of course craftspeople, vendors, and innkeepers. For the most part, the farmers and shepherds kept to themselves in the villages and fields of the surrounding countryside, but now and then they wandered into the city to peddle their livestock and produce. Even at this late hour, Malachi could see that some of the city's occupants just would not call it a day. A few wealthy young men still searched the moonlit streets for adventure and mischief. Here and there an old man lingered under the archway of some door to talk with his fellow crony. Now and then an occasional wandering oil lamp flickered in the darkness of a shadowed street, and somewhere in the night Malachi could hear the yelping of one of the scavenger dogs as a hapless passerby stumbled over it. From his vantage point atop the rooftop balcony, Malachi could see the city sprawling its way up toward the north. Across the acres of rooftops, he could clearly make out the Roman soldiers standing in the flickering torchlight as they guarded the walls of Herod's former palace and the Antonia fortress. The bray of pack animals hinted that on the Damascus road a few dawdling travelers approached the city. Malachi smiled to himself. Surely they must know that they would probably have to spend the night outside the city gate. The city authorities seldom opened the gates after dark. except perhaps during the Passover. Malachi clucked his tongue and shook his head in disbelief. As a merchant, he knew only too well the hazards that plagued such travelers. Bandits on the road at this hour did not make welcome companions. For all those still out there at this hour, he could only pray that no harm would befall them. And the Sabbath had begun hours ago. They must be Gentiles, Malachi muttered, or irreverent Jews, one or the other, for neither would consider traveling on the Sabbath to be of much consequence. It should be no surprise with the Romans occupying the land, and nothing about the Jewish way of life could ever be sacred or secure. Their general disregard for all that Malachi and his people considered holy made them a curse to everyone and everything in the Jewish world. The Roman authorities and soldiers did what they wanted and took what they pleased. They could commandeer a horse or pack animal if they wished, or rip your cloak right off your back. Why, they could even take the lunch right out of your mouth if they so desired. An annoying moth fluttered persistently around Malachi's face, searching for warmth. He brushed it away impatiently and sighed. Would the Messiah never come? Would Israel ever be free of the oppressive Romans who monitored every move that the inhabitants of Jerusalem made in its streets? And taxes! It seemed as if the Romans had a tax collector on every street corner, and penalties were heavy if you couldn't or wouldn't pay. Malachi winced as he thought of all of the bribes he had had to pay as a prosperous merchant back home in Caesarea. It had been a major task during the last year just keeping the local tax collectors off his back. Several tax collectors, actually. There was the tax collector in his own neighborhood and the one who had jurisdiction over the shops in the merchant district of Caesarea. Oh, and of course he must not forget the governor's own tax official who regularly came looking for under-the-table bribes on goods imported from outside the country. Occupiers, that was what the Romans were, and empire builders. Entering a new region, they would conquer it and then set up a new government, new laws, new culture. The Roman citizens had all the rights as they brought in their shrines and slaves and money. It was a whole new way of life for everyone. And Jerusalem had its own set of problems. Maybe that was because it was the religious center of the Jewish culture. Although the Romans did allow a puppet form of government to operate under the auspices of the temple, they always had several garrisons of soldiers stationed in and around the vicinity. Malachi was glad that he didn't have to deal with such powerful civil and religious tensions where he lived. Not that Caesarea was much better off than Jerusalem. The Jews and Gentiles didn't exactly get along there either. Caesarea was a predominantly Gentile city. But Malachi had learned to make his business work for him, both economically and socially. Traveling frequently from time to time, he came up to Jerusalem on business. It was a good life. He was a merchant of fine tapestries and carpets. Some said he possessed the finest stock in the region. But tonight he was in Jerusalem on business other than commerce. He was here searching, on a quest, one might say. Certain rumors had intrigued Malachi for some time. Stories of a miraculous healer named Jesus from Nazareth in Galilee. The man had become quite popular during the past few years and a spiritual leader of sorts. There were those who touted him as a revolutionary in some sense of the word. Others were calling him teacher and rabbi. His most faithful supporters referred to him simply as master. But the real question, was he the promised one, the long-looked-for Messiah? Malachi had heard that Jesus was losing ground with the Jewish leadership in Jerusalem, and that if he was going to make prominent political moves, he would have to do it soon. This latest rumor had reached Caesarea, prompting a deployment of several more squadrons of soldiers to the Roman Praetorium in Jerusalem. Other rumors circulated that there were not so believable, such as the account Malachi had heard of Jesus walking on water up there on the Sea of Tiberias in Galilee. Probably some bogus tale hatched around the evening campfires of shepherds and caravan travelers, or a last-ditch effort by his followers to increase his popularity with the masses. And then there were the stories of his feeding thousands, they said, with a single basket of food. Simple peasant food, a few fish and loaves, but food nevertheless, and thousands had shared it. Believable as far as miracles of God were concerned. Maybe. Authentic? Probably not. But the story of late that had really taken the region by storm involved Jesus raising a man back to life. Oh, Malachi had heard such stories before, but to him they were the stuff of folk tales and legends, just idle talk. As a business person, Malachi's tried and true policy had always been, if you show me the goods, then I can buy the merchandise. Stories were nice, but as for himself, Malachi had to be able to see something before he could believe in it. And yet, this latest incident sounded pretty reliable. Scores of people had seen the miracle, right there at the tomb just a few days before. Somewhere just beyond Jerusalem's walls, someone had been in a tomb for 4 days and then been raised to life again, walked right out of the tomb. It was earth-shattering in its implications, if it was actually true. And that was the biggest question of all, wasn't it? That was the problem. If the story was true, if any of these stories could be confirmed, then maybe Malachi would have something on which to pin his wavering hope for a Messiah. But how does one go about proving some wild tale to be true? Well, Malachi had pondered the dilemma again and again during the several weeks prior to this trip to Jerusalem. Once and for all, if he wanted to get to the bottom of the quandary that had been tormenting his heart for so long now, he was just going to have to track down the stories. He had to find out for himself. Hearsay wasn't good enough for him, never had been. When he got a thing in his head, he had to sort it out, sift through all the whys and wherefores, and then search out the real story back to its origin. Then, and only then, could he reach a conclusion based on the evidence. Kind of philosophical, Malachi guessed, but it worked for him. He shivered in the cold night air. A mist had begun to settle on the lower regions of the city, but the wind was bringing the murky chill of the evening's dampness up and across the rooftops. Absent-mindedly, Malachi pulled his cloak tighter around him. He had given his investigation quite a bit of thought. To do it right, he would have to find credible people who could give him verifiable, genuine accounts of the miracle man in action. Witnesses were what Malachi needed, like in a court of law at the city gate. He must find people who could testify as to where Jesus had come from, probe their impressions of who he really was. It wouldn't be easy. So that was Malachi's mission. If he had the courage to go through with it, he felt that he needed to find the truth. At least that was what he thought he really wanted. The question was, what if he wasn't happy with the truth? What if this man called Jesus did turn out to be the Messiah? That was something Malachi had always thought he really wanted. But would Jesus be the kind of Messiah everybody hoped for? Somebody that would meet their expectations? The evening starlight winked sleepily above as the nocturnal concert ebbed and then surged on into the night. Somewhere above in the sky, a night bird whistled its way on an evening hunt. Malachi went to his pallet and stretched out under the stars. It was a cloudless night. Despite the chill, he would sleep out of doors. Maybe the night sky would clear his mind and make him a better perspective on the exciting yet overwhelming task ahead of him. He sure hoped so.